What's happening, guys? This is Logan Robinson from Hear the Spear, presented to you by NoelGaming.com. We're here not live, but hitting record this time for this week's show on Hear the Spear. And we're also recording on a Thursday evening instead of a Wednesday. This is thanks to Dustin and his Celtics. And he ended up not even able to come on the show this week because he's too sick anyways. So we're just on here just wondering what's going on. StreamYard is down currently, so we can't do this live. iMessage was down like an hour before this, so I think everything's just falling apart. But we're here. We're still here to give you guys some content this week. Stay consistent with the show, and just going off of the title for this week's show, I think some people should be pretty interested in hearing some updates on the end of ACC and where Florida State as a program, football, everything about the university as well entails. Are they going to SEC? Are they going to the Big Ten? How soon is that going to be? What's the timeline for that? We'll discuss that this evening. We've got a few things else to share with everybody. We've got the kickoff time for Florida State versus Georgia Tech over there in Dublin, Ireland. We'll be talking about that along with Florida State's home opener in Doak against Boston College. We got a time announced for that as well. We've got some early odds for Florida State versus UF, Clemson. And we've also got some over and under on wins for Florida State and the 2024 season as well. So nothing too crazy outside of our ACC talk this evening, but looking forward to it. To start us off, we've got our guy Jackson Bakich with us to cover you've been on top of all of our ACC coverage so far. Dustin has loaded that into your hands, and we've been really appreciative of you grinding and keeping us up to date on that, because as we were talking about in the production meeting, we are definitely a ways behind. So welcome to the show, Jackson and Austin Veazey below, our lead basketball writer. What's going on, gentlemen? Good evening.
It's weird.
Good evening. Yeah,
Thursday, not live, no Dustin. I would say it's the preferential situation with no Dustin, but it's definitely weird not being live.
It is very
and
not being live.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you having me on. And this whole ACC lawsuit thing, it's been a blessing for me because I've been able to write a lot more stories. And keeping up to date with it. It's been a grind, but it's been a lot of fun. So really appreciative of y'all having me on, and y'all let me write for Noel Game Day. It's been a great time so far.
Hell yeah, man. We've enjoyed having you, and primarily having you on to kind of, update the listeners, also update us as well. VZ was, on hand with a lot of this stuff a couple months ago. Then things got busy, and we'll hopefully be able to share some more news on that later. But the ACC and all this is hard to keep up with. Just going off of, I'd category myself as just, I like seeing what's going on the field. I don't like all the political stuff on the back end. I understand things are going on here, this is going on there, but also to timeline wise, I don't know when this is going to happen. I just want to see football be played, but also as a fan, and most FSU fans, they want to get out of this conference that they're dealing with. And, definitely when you've got big players like the SEC, the Big Ten, it's really intriguing, a lot of money. You've got some really big programs you'd be facing, and it just puts a lot more resources in the programs that Florida State holds in their arsenal and the athletic department. So we'll discuss that in a few. As always, you guys can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. If you're on YouTube watching while we're recording this, make sure you hit that like button. Definitely appreciate everybody showing some love and still hanging out with us this off season as we go through a couple more months. Time is kind of flying by. Got to enjoy the summer, but we're getting close to this 2024 season, guys. So slowly but surely going to make it over to fall camp. But let's get started. I was on a radio show this morning, 1010 XL. Shout out to them. Got to talk a little bit about the ACC and where Florida State stands and such. But maybe, I think, Jackson, just starting off with you, just off of, I think a lot of our listeners too and followers don't keep up maybe too crazy all into that bag of the ACC and the latest on it. But, maybe start us off with kind of just a timeline after, ACC filed its suit against FSU back in late December. And then Florida State also filed a suit against the ACC in Leon County. Where do we stand now in May to begin this year?
Well, yeah. So really to start it off, this whole relationship between the ACC and the FSU, it's a lot like someone has cheated, you know, in a relationship. To me, that's what it feels like. But at the same time, you know, one of those partners in the relationship brings a lot of money to the table. So, you know, it's a bit of a grim comparison there, but that's really what's going on. Florida State brings a lot of money to the table, but you know, they're looking at other conferences. They're looking at the Power Two, obviously, like the SEC and the Big Ten. A lot of people think the Big Ten is probably where they're going to end up, but who knows at this point? Especially with the college football playoff, you know, kind of being owned by ESPN. It seems like there might be a bit of sour grapes there. But really, what this case right now is really focused on is the grant of rights agreement, which basically is, you know, who controls Florida State's television rights for their home games. And that's not just football, but all of their sports, you know. And that agreement technically right now goes through 2036. ESPN in about, I believe, 2 or 3 years has the option to opt out of that agreement. But really what it comes down to is, you know, who is going to have control of those home games if Florida State ends up leaving the conference. And there's also, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars at stake should they leave the conference and exit fees. And those are all up in the air for speculation. What's his name? John C. Cooper, Judge John C. Cooper of Leon County. He's called for mediation between the two parties. So that will, you know, start to unravel itself as it goes on. But there are so many different things going all on at once in this case. It's you know, it's hard to really put it linear, you know, in a chronological order, and it's more like a web, really. So you have that main issue at stake, and then there's so many different things around it that are involved. For instance, Attorney General Ashley Moody got involved. Attorney General of Florida got involved pretty recently. She's suing the ACC because the ACC is arguing that Florida State, you know, a public institution, you know, the laws in the state of Florida don't necessarily apply to Florida State because they waive their quote unquote sovereign immunity by dealing with the ACC, which operates in Charlotte, North Carolina, Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. So that's what we know so far. And there's so many things that we need rulings from judges on, both in Leon County and Mecklenburg County, that at this point, it's more of a wait and see. But looking at all this, you know, through rose-colored glasses, I guess you could say, as you know, we might be a little biased here. It seems as though Florida State is slowly but surely chipping away at what we thought was originally ironclad.
Yeah, and you know, for me, I look at it first. You know, what's the timeline for getting out? You know, I think a lot of people wonder, you know, is this going to happen soon? When does this occur? Before, after season? Is this going to be a 2-3 year span? You know, should this have been something that Florida State was working on in years prior? You know, Michael Alford, from, you know, what we know, you know, put a team and assembled a team, you know, behind the scenes to go in, not really behind the scenes. Those hires were announced publicly, but still put a team together to try to conquer and figure out first of this grant of rights, which it seems like they're just keeping full on lockdown mode up there in Charlotte. They're not allowing anybody to touch that or look at the contract, go back. If you go, you got to put your phones away. Can't go in there. Can't share those documents. They've got that completely locked down. So, you know, it's where Florida State stands in the conference too, grabbing, you know, kind of building a team with the ACC, other schools too, trying to help conquer a big monster, it feels like. But the timetable just seems like there's kind of not a defined timetable where Florida State might have a chance of actually being able to leave the, you know, ACC.
And part of the reason for that is you have two different cases going on at once, right? And the phrase "race to the courthouse," or excuse me, "race to the finish," a race to judgment rather, has been popping up. Because should a judge, you know, put down his gavel and, you know, make a final decision on this case, then it would likely set the precedent for the other case. So, you know, obviously there's different court dates during different times of the month, and you know, judges can rule on certain things that could slow the process up. For instance, the North Carolina judge, Louis A. Bledsoe is his name. He just recently issued a stay, which basically kind of halts proceedings for a little bit in North Carolina. So we have no clue in terms of how fast this is going to move. Really, I think what will end up happening, and this is, you know, me, I'm not a legal scholar or anything, but a lot of people have been pointing to this, is we're at some point going to get to a settlement. Because not only is this a bad look for the ACC, but it's bad business, right? If you are trying to get sponsors, if you're trying to, you know, put a product on the field that's appeasing to viewers, no one wants to see a, you know, a divorce between the people within that conference, especially some of your biggest cash cows, which is, you know, Florida and Clemson and UNC, who's, you know, kind of, you know, throwing some criticisms out there in the open as they had their ACC meetings this weekend, or a couple days ago. So a settlement's probably what's going to happen, but in terms of just the strict nature of these two cases, no one really knows. I mean, it could go on for forever, as far as I know.
And I would like to point out that we're also going to have to factor in the Clemson lawsuits that are going on as well, since they sued the ACC filing in Pickens County in South Carolina. And then, of course, the ACC countersued them as well in Mecklenburg County. So you really have 4 cases going on revolving the same kind of discussions. And you're
5
going to get
Moody.
Yeah, so you're going to get a whole bunch of little different discussions and rulings from different judges throughout this. And, you know, one may end up setting a precedent that the other has to follow soon after. And we just really don't know how that's going to go right now, because as much as this is in the early stages with Florida State, it's even earlier with Clemson. Like, I don't even know if they've gotten to a court case yet or gotten to court yet.
I'm going to say,
yeah, it's just
go ahead, Jackson. Go ahead.
Legal mumbo jumbo, and honestly, like, it's caused me to start drinking. I'm going to be honest with you.
Just now starting. You're at school at Florida State. You should be automatically drinking.
Hey, no, don't say that.
There you go. As he takes a sip, I love it. That's what we do here at Noel Gaming. This is actually like before you get brought on. We just have to. Well, we didn't do that with you, VZ, though.
No, you did not.
That day's coming, though. That day is coming. No, it's not. I was going to point to you, though, VZ. You know, we think of football a whole ton, but, you know, the ACC back in its day, you know, a lot of things have changed and like a 5-year span, I would say. But, you know, still, it's the ACC. There are some blue bloods teams in that conference in basketball. How do you think that affects, you know, your sport and everything of that nature? Because you know more of the inside than probably anybody else that's, you know, covering the team and has been behind the scenes.
Well, just on a micro level, Florida State suing the ACC is their biggest priority right now across the entire athletic department. You know, not just football, not just basketball, wherever else. This is their sole focus. Obviously, they want to finish the football-only facility and some of these other upgrades they have going on in facilities. But you could point to this and say this is probably the biggest reason Florida State didn't want to move on from Coach Hamilton this offseason. You know, they have a few million left on his deal. It's just one more year. They're probably sitting there going, you know, Coach Hamilton's been phenomenal for us for 2+ decades. Let's ride it out one more year. Don't have to spend any extra money when we really need as many assets as we can get into this. And we'll just see where we are next year and see what happens in this case. As far as the whole conference, you know, it's really intriguing because the Big 12 has set up a phenomenal basketball conference between Kansas and Baylor and Houston and Arizona's coming. That's going to be a phenomenal basketball conference. And they're probably looking at the ACC, licking their chops going, man, if this opens up, we could bring Duke in here. Could we possibly convince North Carolina to come in? I kind of have the feeling that North Carolina and the Virginias, they have the academic standards that they'd want to stay, you know, kind of regional with the Big Ten or maybe the SEC. But there's definitely a lot of discussions and there's money to be made in the ACC basketball. The standards haven't been there for the last, let's say, half decade, last 5 years or so, but it's still the ACC. The brand recognition, especially in basketball, is huge between Carolina, Duke, Syracuse, Notre Dame. You know, Miami was just in the Final Four 2 years ago. There's so many great basketball programs in this conference that they're certainly sitting on the side going, if this opens up, we're going to have some opportunities.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Yeah, and I would like to add, I think there is some politics as well with the Hamilton situation. I think we've seen, especially with the firing of Mike Martin Jr., that Michael Alford's pretty aggressive, and
Yeah.
he'll go for what he wants, and he doesn't. He was smart with Norvell, obviously, and I think maybe there was a lack of capital there as well at that point. Obviously, Norvell's done a wonderful job, and Alford made the right decision. But for those that remember, Bobby Bowden was at Florida State for 34 years, right? And they kind of pushed him out. They basically fired him. They told him, God rest his soul. They told him basically to retire. So I think it's a similar situation with Leonard Hamilton. I think it's kind of a bad look, especially with 1 year left on his contract. Florida State has also shown improvement, regardless of how it looks to the eye, to a fan. They showed improvement from 2 years ago to last year. And so the optics of that just don't look good. If you want to hire a new coach and you want him there for a long time, how does that look to another coach that's thinking about coming to Florida State when they're firing a guy that has been there for 20 plus years? The guys always graduate, been to however many tournaments. So I think it's a very similar situation to Bobby Bowden back in the day.
And not only that, but how many smart and bright coaches want to go, Florida State's suing their conference right now. Is that really a secure situation currently until that gets kind of settled out? Because there's some good coaches on the market this offseason. And for the record, I've said this a bunch of times. I think Leonard Hamilton deserves one more year for what he's done for this program. Too. But I was a huge fan of Pat Kelsey, and seeing what he's done at Louisville is like, oh man, here we go. They're going to be right back at it. Abdur Rahim just got an extension at USF. I think that's someone Florida State at least keeping an eye on. And then even if you look at Sam Cassell, he's in the rumors for the Lakers job, and he's been in the rumor mill for NBA jobs for the last 4 or 5 years. And I know that's someone Florida State's interested in. So we'll see what ends up happening. But it's certainly one of those that even if they did move on from Hamilton, there's not a lot of coaches that would go, they're suing their conference. They don't really have a great basketball NIL. They don't really have a lot of money because they're tied up in suing their conference and football only facilities and all this other stuff. Maybe I should just go somewhere else and focus on a better future there instead of trying to really reform this basketball program. I think waiting the year is definitely the smart decision there, but a lot of it does come from suing the ACC.
Austin, do you think there's any credibility to maybe Charlie Ward getting in the mix?
Nah, he's been a high school coach at FSU high school for a decade now. I kind of just have that feeling that he wants to stay at that level. I don't know that he necessarily wants to be a college coach. And I've heard a bunch of names. I haven't heard him mentioned whatsoever. I think he's perfectly happy where he is.
I want to go back to the football side real quick. We'll kind of wrap up the main ACC part of this. But one thing that looking at the ACC and looking at what FSU can leverage is also the 2 or the 3 additions that they brought in: Stanford, Cal, and SMU. Bringing those 3 in, saying, hey, we're going to bring these West Coast teams. We're going to bring these guys over from that West Side region, and you're just going to play them. And here's what's going to do. And that's also going to put some more money in your pocket. That's what their game plan. That's something that I think Florida State has been able to and should be able to leverage across what the other teams and programs as well, the other universities in the mix here. I feel like that could be a move on their end as well. I'm just interested on your take on that, Jackson.
Sorry, I zoned out. Say it again.
Just with Florida State, the way that they can leverage this a little bit better, and I'm sure other universities are doing the same thing, but bringing in these 3 teams from the West Coast with Stanford, Cal, SMU there in Dallas, but still bringing those Western region schools and programs over. And, FSU, the rest of these schools are like, whoa, we never signed up for this. And what the ACC is trying to say is, this is going to help us bring in some more money and put in your pockets. But I just want to get your thoughts on that and where Florida State probably can use that as leverage whenever they're dealing with this in court.
Well, yeah, they've said in court filings that the ACC has breached its fiduciary duty to by bringing in Cal and Stanford and SMU, which is a real slap in the face to those three schools. Kind of like hey, what do we do? But
Mhm.
I do think if Florida State wants to leverage itself, obviously, it needs to kind of hammer the point home of this might be the end of the conference should they leave. And not only should they leave, but there's obviously going to be schools that go with them. Obviously, Clemson's in the mix. UNC appears to be rumbling. They might be in the mix. But that's really what it comes down to. I mean, we saw it with Oregon and USC and UCLA leaving the Pac-12. When those cash cows leave, the conference will not be the same. It simply just won't be the same. And it's going to bring in so much less money. And so, the ACC instituted this program in which, if you meet these certain goals, if you're in the top 25, if you make the CFP championship game, then you'll be compensated for it. But, we're talking $2 or $3 million, nothing super substantial. The only way Florida State stays in the ACC is if there is a complete revenue distribution change in the conference. That's pretty much the only way they could compete, at that level. So that's pretty much their only bargaining tool, I'd say.
I will say I don't know that the ACC will ever fully dismantle. I think there's enough history and long-standing relationships with especially the Tobacco Road schools and those schools in the Carolinas and Virginias that I think they would always be a fan, and maybe they could follow the path that the Big 12 did, who did a phenomenal job. Really as great of a job as you can do is they lost their two cash cows. They lost Texas and Oklahoma, two massive football brands, but they recovered by getting Colorado, Arizona, Utah, even bringing in UCF and Houston last year. They've done a really good job of kind of rebuilding that. And maybe the ACC can see that and go, yeah, we might be losing Florida State and Clemson, but maybe we can still rebound enough to kind of hold this together. Because I don't think Miami really wants to go anywhere. Wake Forest definitely doesn't want to go anywhere because they're going down, if anywhere. I don't think NC State really wants to go anywhere. So we'll see. I definitely see what you're saying on that point, but I'd have a hard time believing the ACC will just fall apart altogether.
See, I agree with you on that, but I would counter that with there is just not, other than Miami, and considering the rest of the group of five, which has also been ransacked, there aren't any cash cows left. That's the problem. And even Miami, who's had some trouble financially in the past, not necessarily trouble financially, but not been super willing to fund their athletic department. Should Florida State and Clemson leave, go to the Power 2, where is the ACC going to get its money from? I think there's a possibility they could kind of move to a Big East model and kind of stay a basketball-only conference. But I just don't see the conference surviving a Florida State, Clemson, and others exit.
I think that it really just depends what happens with the rest of the brands. If they can hold on to Duke, that's a big enough basketball brand, and even Virginia, but I'd have a hard time believing they'd stay. But if they could hold on to Duke at the very least, it's a big enough basketball brand to really carry a lot of that financial stuff. And maybe you can convince some of these other schools that have big basketball brands to come in and try to convince them to build up their football program. At the same time, you may have Pitt look at it and go, hey, our rival West Virginia's in the Big 12. Let's go with them. We'll see. I still think the ACC could hold on to the Boston Colleges, Georgia Techs, Miami's, Dukes. I think they could hold on to those guys. At least you would think. Wake Forest at this point just doesn't bring anything to the table. And I hope Wake Forest fans are listening to this so they can get angry at me. I love arguing with Wake Forest fans. It's my favorite thing. But you don't bring it is fun. You don't bring anything to the table. Oh, they exist. I live 45 minutes from Winston-Salem. But they just don't bring anything to the table. So at that point, maybe ACC goes, hey, Carolina, Florida State, Clemson around here. There's really no reason for you to be here. I hope that happens, but we'll see.
once Sam Hartman was gone, we have a graph up right now for our audio listeners, but it shows ACC football total appearances in games with 4+ million TV viewers. It goes from all the way back to 2012 through week 10 of 2023. Someone put a chart together here, but Florida State carries the conference here. Clemson, well, Florida State at 31, then Clemson at 28, and it drops down to Notre Dame, but these are strictly just versus ACC and this graph. So it drops, but Notre Dame would be higher in just general sense, facing other opponents outside the ACC. But then you've got Miami all the way down to 12. They have no excuse here. There's no excuses here, but they're at 12, and Virginia Tech, Louisville. But yeah, Wake Forest at the very end there, since Sam Hartman's gone, big fat 0, which I thought there'd be a little bit more during his time.
No one cares about Wake Forest. That's the thing. No one cares. They don't move the needle in either direction. No one hates them. No one loves them. No one slightly dislikes them outside of like me and 3 other people. But it's, and Florida State has been bad in football for 40% of this chart, and they're still number 1. They move a needle in a direction that these other programs don't. The only reason Clemson is that high is because they've been so successful during this time. If you look at 2000 through 2012, they're not this high.
Yeah. But yeah, Florida, that logo hits differently. And we'll talk about it here with some times being announced for games so far. But Florida State continues to just drive a ton of eyes and TV ratings. And that's something that, of course, in court, all this kind of stuff that they got to figure out and try to use some kind of leverage in a lot of different ways. But I think timeline-wise, it's just a plain, fat, simple, don't know. We just got to see how things unfold. I think FSU fans and whoever else following this, they'd like to see something happen sooner rather than later, and everybody wants that. But Florida State is put into a really sticky situation and spot, and they've got to find some kind of good argument of how to get out of here. You're not going to get out of here clean. You're going to have to pay, and then Florida State feels like they shouldn't have to be in this situation, but you're gonna have to throw up some money. And yeah, but I wanted to get some kind of conversation on here because I know we don't really do that too much on this show, but I thought it was a good idea for us to run through and honestly see what is the latest on that. Jackson has been killing it for coverage on there. So if you like written work on all this kind of stuff and updates on a weekly basis, that's at NoleGameDay.com. He's been killing it for us there. So make sure you guys stay tuned to that. We're always posting out coverage frequently. Let's jump into a few quick hitters before we hop off of here for the evening. Florida State announced that they will be kicking off their 2024 season, obviously over there overseas in Dublin, Ireland against Georgia Tech, but it's going to be at noon on August 24th. We knew the date. We practically predicted this time on the show, I think, VZ at some point, but we knew this would be an earlier game to begin the season. With that announcement also came Florida State's first home game, which is going to be televised on ESPN at 7:30. It's going to be September 2nd against Boston College. So Florida State going to have a night game in Doak to kick off, or should I say half Doak? It's not going to be really full Doak anymore for a little while, but it's going to be half Doak when FSU kicks off their home season there. But some good times. We got a little nooner. I mean, it's a 0 week of college football. So no matter what, like fans in college football are going to be watching, but definitely going to be dope. I think over there it's 5.
Yeah, I was just about to say, to clarify, it's noon Eastern, 5 p.m. Dublin time.
Yeah, 5 p.m. Dublin time.
Yeah, if they did it any later, I don't think the Florida State fans would make it to the stadium. So
yeah, no,
it makes sense.
Yep, very good point. Very good point. And then you're back at it. For those who travel back, safe travels. You're back at Doak. Get to sleep in. On September 2nd, you got a night game against Boston College, which Boston College gave Florida State some fits last year a little bit. Interested to see what their squad looks like.
And it's
they had a roller coaster ride of a program throughout their season, like so many highs and lows, people leaving. I was like, okay, Boston College, okay, kind of nice, but they've had some changes.
It's the homecoming of Trayshawn Ward, transfer there this off season.
Yeah.
He'll be playing in a different set of maroon and gold this time, and I'm sure that'll be a little different for Florida State fans. I'm excited to see him back in Doak Campbell Stadium, though, for that game.
Yeah. You excited? You excited for some Treshaun Ward to see that, Jackson, and the stands? Little, little homecoming.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Also,
he was such a great player. I mean, he had one of the best, some of the best vision I'd seen since Dalvin Cook. I'm not saying he is Dalvin Cook, but his ability to find those gaps and shoot through them were astounding. In that BC game, assuming Castellanos starts, I'm excited to watch guys like Marvin Jones Jr. I'm excited to watch guys like Timmy Durajaye. I think those guys could, and Josh Farmer, Patrick Payton, those guys, working on the ends, also at the linebacker position, they have to be able to contain them. They weren't able to do it last year. It nearly led to, an early season loss that really would have, hurt the CFP chances more than, losing your quarterback apparently. But how those defensive ends keep contained against Castellanos will be interesting to watch.
I forgot really, Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien is the head coach for Boston College.
We're gonna really get an early test on DJ Lundy because a lot of his weaknesses these last few years are how he plays in space. He's great downhill, but once you get him out in space, he's a little more susceptible. I mean, that's a tough early matchup, and we'll see how far he's come. But this is gonna be a fun, dynamic offense in Boston College if they work out all the kinks.
Yeah, we'll be missing. We'll definitely be missing Kalen DeLoach for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a game where you'd want Kalen DeLoach on your side for it. Too bad, so sad. He's down here with me in the Tampa area, but no, DJ Lundy. You're going against two really talented guys with vision. Castellanos showed us that last year, but now you add Treshaun Ward, which hopefully Mike Norvell can use a lot of his past knowledge on that kid because they thought very highly of him, but he got to go get an opportunity whenever he went over to Kansas State, transferred there. Then he transferred over to Boston College, and that's going to be a really fun matchup. And Doak for Treshaun to come back, and it's going to be awesome to see them be able to take some photos afterward at the game. That kid was highly loved in that locker room, and actually he came on here too and announced on here the Spear. It gave us his story of obtaining and earning that scholarship too from Florida State after coming in as a walk-on. So I'm sure a lot of the current Noles are looking forward to facing him and do competitively and also on the friendly wise. It's definitely not going to be friendly on the field, but
probably not.
Imagine him in that running back room now. Golly,
woo, Lordy,
one stacked running back room.
It already is.
That's how it already is. That's right.
That's how I'm starting to feel for now. Every rotation of years in that running back room, it's just like, what about if we added Deshaun Corbin back here? What about if you put Trey Benson earlier years with Florida State? What would that look like for Mike Norvell's offense? It's just like Treshaun Ward, went from walk on to starter, and has gotten opportunities in two other programs now. It's just that room just continues to reload under Mike Norvell and Coach Yak over there, Florida State's running backs coach David Johnson. Shout out to the Yak. Let's talk about some odds right here, some betting. We're getting close to fall. I'm all over betting right now. Beezy's not a big better, but he's starting to inch closer to it. Jackson, are you a better?
I'm not.
Betting man?
I'll tell you what. I used to be somewhat of a sports gambler. Had some hits. I've had some bets hit. Had some ones that did not hit. Got to bet on the Super Bowl always. I'm more of a Texas Hold'em blackjack kind of guy, but maybe the start of the season
Tables, man.
Get back into it.
Here's the thing. Dustin gambles enough for all of us.
Tell him about what he's betting on.
Between
overseas
ping pong and during COVID, it was Russian soccer.
Korean baseball, I bet.
He's got it covered. I don't need to. He's got it all down for all of Nole Game Day.
Yeah, his is a little bit.
Is he good? I might need to start tailing him.
I don't think he is. We were there in New Orleans with him. I don't think he is.
Yeah, up and down, up and down. UFC has been pretty well for me. Golf, I'm starting to get into betting wise, but I don't throw down a ton of money on them. I'm just kind of using it for entertainment. Like, oh, cool, got a win out of it. Nice. But let's talk about some early odds, though, guys. Florida State is currently favored by all of their big rivals going into the 2024 season. We'll start off with Clemson. So Florida State is favored by 4 touchdowns there. This is going to be a home game for Florida State.
4 touchdowns? I don't think you said
no,
that
not
right.
4 touchdowns, 4 points. I'm going to say points, not 4 touchdowns. Oh God, goodness gracious almighty. No, not that. Yeah, DJ Uiagalelei throws 6 touchdowns. This game is not close. No, but yeah, Florida State's favored by 4 points to Clemson. That's a home game for the Seminoles this upcoming season. Then FSU, we'll save the best for last. Florida State's favored by a point there. That's going to be in Miami. Be down there for that game, covering it. And then to finish off, Florida State is nearly favored by 2 touchdowns. This time I can use touchdowns, but it's 12.5 favorite there for Florida State at home against the UF Gators. This is the good home year. You know, every year it changes and everything, but this is the good home schedule for Florida State. But thoughts on these odds, guys? I think to me, maybe the most interesting is what just stands out to me first is because I actually didn't get to see this article earlier, but I think Florida State being favored by 4, only 1 to Miami, but 4 to Clemson is interesting to me.
Well,
I think it's because of I think it's home field advantage, but it's Miami though. Like that's the thing where I'm like, okay, but it's Miami.
That's the thing. And Miami is really talented. They've done a great job in the transfer portal this offseason, but it's also Mario Cristobal, who's time and time again let his team down in big coaching moments. And I also talk about with the over-unders here in a second. You know, odds makers really like Miami for whatever reason. And for me, until they prove it on the field, I would hammer Florida State -1. But we'll see how they live up to the swamp in Gainesville in August to start that season, because that's going to be a rough game.
Yeah, I agree. It's I would hold your bets until you watch that Miami game against Florida. You know, if Miami goes out there and, you know, Florida's only projected 5 wins, they have probably the hardest schedule I've ever seen down there in Gainesville. But if Miami goes out there and with Cam Ward and, you know, beats him by 2 touchdowns, then maybe Vegas is onto something. But, you know, if vice versa, if Florida goes out and wins by 2 touchdowns, Graham Mertz is a good quarterback. I think we did not think that coming into this past season. I think we all think it now. Not necessarily great, but he's a good quarterback. You know, a lot of people are saying Heismert's down there in Gainesville. I'm not necessarily sure I agree with it, but and I'm going off a tangent.
We're talking about Lagway. They want Lagway to be
Lagway as well.
Yeah.
Don't get me started on Florida.
Yeah.
You got some things.
The problem is though.
Easy?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Easy. Sorry.
Oh,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say Billy Napier's not going to be there by November, so it doesn't matter. Mertz is not going to win a high. He's a good quarterback. I agree. He definitely outperformed my expectations last season. But those last 7 games, I was talking about this with one of my friends the other night. Their last 7 games are all against top 25 teams from last year. And obviously there's a lot of turnover, but I think Kentucky's going to be solid this year. They have to go to Rocky Top in Tennessee. They're not beating Georgia. They have to go to Florida State. They have to play Ole Miss, Texas A&M early. Their over-under is 5. I don't see a way they get to 5 unless miracles happen. It's going to be a rough season in Gainesville, hopefully.
I mean, if they beat UCF, if they beat Miami, there's a lot of ifs in there, but I mean,
that's what I'm saying. These are ifs.
Yeah.
These are ifs. Like UCF could very well beat them. Samford could very well beat them. That's a really good FCS program. You know, we'll see. Who knows? Who knows what
years ago?
Yeah. Well, you know, Texas A&M. Who knows what they're going to look like early on with Mike Elko? At least Florida got them early on in the season. But outside of that, you know, that back half of the schedule is absolutely devastating. And I'm sure it was Florida looked at it and went, we're going to get a rough schedule. Napier's going to be gone anyways. We don't want a first-year head coach coming in here and getting sandblasted his first year. Just ride this out and see what we look like next offseason.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, last season, Florida started off okay. They won some games that we didn't expect them to. And then they, lost 5-6 in a row? Do I have that right? To close out the season?
I don't remember, but it sounds right.
That was a lot of games.
Had they won that Missouri game, they would have been bowl eligible. But, it's going to be very interesting. 13.5 in Doak, or excuse me, you said 12.5, right? Yeah, in Doak. I think that's fair. But I would agree with you. I would agree with you, Logan. That 4-point spread with Clemson might be a little high. I mean, we saw that Clemson team last year take Florida State to overtime. Granted, Florida State didn't play their best game. Clemson has a very good defense. They've had a very good defense for a while, but a lot of downfield shots. They were testing those DBs of Clemson. But I would also agree that the 1-point spread against Miami is very, very intriguing. Florida State has done very well in Hard Rock for a while now. 2020 obviously is kind of that outlier, but since then, I mean, Florida State, they call it Doak South for a reason. So I'm honestly probably hammering that -1, but I'm gonna wait until I see them play Florida first.
I actually really like the -4 number against Clemson. I think DJ is gonna have something to prove in that game, and I think Florida State's gonna be a better running team this year, which is what Norvell wants to do with this offense. I think that offensive line's a little bit better run blocking. There was a lot of mess ups with that offensive line last year,
like
not getting their
styles.
Yeah, just not their. They weren't getting the right run blocking assignments too often. Just completely whiffing blocks, guys getting off blocks too easily. I think that's going to be huge emphasis this offseason. We've talked about it a few times throughout the spring, where I just think this is going to be a run-focused offense. And Clemson, as much work as they do high school recruiting, once again, they didn't take any transfers. And there was a whole Dabo quote, they're transferring from high school to college. But I think I've said it a few times. I think this is a different age of college football, and you have to prioritize these transfers. Norvell's done that as well as anybody. I wouldn't be surprised to see Florida State win that game by 10. I really like that number.
Hammer it down, then. Hammer it down. Yeah,
I won't, but I'll tell Dustin to do it.
Yeah, there you go. I was about to say. I thought you were going to make your first bet here live.
No.
On here is your high. Well, we'll get there one day. But yeah, I think for Florida State, looking at these, for the most part, like I said, a lot of this is home games for Florida State, but for Clemson alone, that helps in that favor. You got DJ there, like you said, wants to get have a chip on his shoulder going into that game for sure. But Florida State has had some battles with Clemson, and I just don't see that stopping. I think those are now just the nail biters going to go on for a little while. Dabo knows how to coach pretty well against Mike Norvell. Mike Norvell got the edge on him this last season, but that's just how it's going to be. Whereas if I look at Miami, Florida State, yeah, Miami's done a lot, and they did a lot this offseason in the transfer portal, but it all comes down to Mario Cristobal at the end of the day. And I think he really kind of nerves out a tiny bit when it comes up to rivalry games, or at least for FSU. And that's where I think things get a little interesting there back in Miami. Again, Florida State, just knowing the culture that's been built in this locker room at FSU, these guys are hungry they're on a mission, and they've got that label across the locker room all throughout the season too, to take out these guys. And that's something that Mike Norvell has done a really good job of marinating into this locker room, going in and understanding that from a recruit, a transfer, these things need to get accomplished here on out, and this is how it's going to stay. And Florida State's going to, run the state. So, but yeah, the interesting odds: Florida State 2 favored 9.5 to get to 10 wins on the season. How y'all feel on that? I feel like that seems pretty accurate for a early post spring odds kind of projection there, in my opinion. That's probably where I would have put myself as well.
Yeah, obviously we'll do our season preview podcast how many ever months down the line, but early on I had Florida State at 10-2. I don't think they've done anything to sway me from that number.
Yeah, and I think it's a fair number as well. And I wrote about this on NoleGameDay.com. Shameless plug. We're on the podcast. Why not?
Yeah, hell yeah.
You only have 6 teams that are in front of you, over under wise, and that's the usual suspects in Texas and excuse me, not Alabama, but Texas, Oregon,
Yeah.
those kind of teams, Georgia as well.
Georgia.
So, for only 6 teams to be better than you in those over under rankings, in a 12-team playoff, you have to be pretty excited about that. I think a lot of people are kind of looking at that number and kind of freaking out. 9.5. They just won 13 games last season, including an undefeated season in an ACC championship. But 10-2 is going to probably get you in the playoff, assuming you win the ACC, or at least you're playing in the ACC championship. So, I think it's a fair number. You have to go to Notre Dame. You have to go to Miami. You have Florida at home, which no matter what people say, 5 wins is their over-under. Don't care. It's always a tough game. You have Clemson at home. You go to SMU, which I think is a game that, people, we talked about it, SMU, people are high on them. You're still going all the way out to Dallas. That's a tough game. You have a new starting quarterback in DJ Uiagalelei. There's a lot of factors in which Florida State, I'm not saying they will, but there's a lot of factors that things could go wrong and they could lose 4 or 5 games this season. I'm not saying they will. I don't think they will. But it's not like last season where there's some games where you can kind of, phone in as a fan. This season, it's not like that. There's a decent amount of question marks going in to fall camp, and we'll see how it plays out.
And just for comparison, for the rest of the ACC, Clemson was at 9.5, Miami was at 9. So they're right there at the top of the ACC, and obviously it's one of those leagues that's up in the air, and at least Florida State's back in the discussion again.
Yep, 100%. Odds are odds, and we have to figure out a few things. We'll see what happens. It's crazy. It's going to be happening internationally across the seas, but we'll see how Florida State looks with that, and see what this offense looks like. I think there's just so many question marks to where you had pivotal players from the last few seasons that are no longer on this roster, and we're going to see who's really going to come up to the plate and be able to try to reach some of the kind of impacts that Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, Kalen DeLoach, Trey Benson, Jordan Travis. I mean, the list goes on. Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson. How do you replace that? And I think that's something that I'm really wondering what Mike Norvell can do in such a quick year span of changing things around. You've got a new quarterback. You've got to work around with the offense a little bit different. You don't have a guy that's so jittery back there in the pocket that can get off those tackles that are being broken up at the offensive line. You don't have a quarterback like that anymore. And so that changes a lot of things in your landscape of how you run your scheme on a week-to-week basis. So I'm really intrigued just how, Mike Norvell is able to, and Coach Atkins are going to craft this offense. I think that's our biggest question mark and going into this season for me, and how that affects wins and losses. But I think that's going to do it for this week's episode, everybody. I know we're not live, so a little bit odd here. So many different technical difficulties going on today, but we should be back here live next Wednesday at 7 p.m. and appreciate everybody coming on YouTube and spending time with us during this off season. Like I said, we'll be having some previews, not anytime soon, but we're getting there to where we talk about this 2024 season and go game by game and really dial in and look at some of these opponents. And after a busy offseason for a lot of these ACC teams. So, yeah, that's going to do it. I appreciate everybody hanging out with us this evening. And we will talk to you guys next week on Hear the Spear at 7 p.m. Cheers.